want to watch you cook Harvard for a little bit. Go for it.
Harvard is not what it seems. Everyone thinks of it as a university. It has very little to do with the university. Structurally, it's a corporation. The Harvard Corporation, which is a 12-person board, runs the Harvard University. The Harvard Corporation now is run by Penny Pritzker. It's the Pritzker family who brought Barack Obama into political relevance in Chicago. Obviously, J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois to this day. Penny Pritzker was Commerce Secretary for the Obama administration. She was the special envoy for the reconstruction of Ukraine. She's worth about $4 billion. She was the chair of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is one of the oldest think tanks in the country and was a frequent cover for CIA funding and CIA outreach work during the Cold War. Documents as early as 1951 show the Central Intelligence Agency planning things in tandem with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. In fact, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace was run from 2014 to 2021 by Bill Burns. And Bill Burns only left the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which had been previously chaired by Penny Pritzker, to run the Central Intelligence Agency. Harvard, what they do through all of their different centers, whether it's the Kennedy Center, the Shorenstein Center, the Berkman-Klein Center, the Belfer Center, they focus on areas of geopolitical conflict and policy that affect the multinational corporations that donate into Harvard and that the Harvard Endowment, the $53 billion Harvard Endowment, invests in. So one of the most shocking examples that has been publicly declassified because of the U.S. government role in it and the scandals that resulted was how Harvard made billions of dollars looting the economy of Russia during what should have been the period of peace that would have unified the U.S. with Eurasia diplomatically, when all of the trillions of state-held assets of the entire Soviet empire converted to capitalism and went through shock therapy. Harvard teamed up with the U.S. government. USAID at that time paid $500 million to Harvard's USAID. It was called the Harvard Institute for International Development. And using Harvard economists and Harvard's international relations specialists and Harvard's practitioners of statecraft, under effectively academic cover, the U.S. State Department and USAID worked with Russian oligarchs in control of the oil and gas sector, in control of the steel sector, in control of all of the different sectors that previously held that wealth publicly. They worked directly with Harvard and then gave the Harvard Endowment, together with George Soros's Quantum Fund, because Soros and Harvard worked together, special private inside access to bid on all of those assets. So they got to buy up, they got a first bite at the apple to buy up on the cheap all of these new assets that were previously held publicly for foreign populations. They did the same thing all over Central and Eastern Europe. And guess what? That was the same policy that the CIA and the State Department had, to take this wealth effectively, and that would increase U.S. national interest because it's being held now by Westerners rather than by foreigners. And you can see the logic of it. But the fact is this revolving door has put Harvard completely at odds with the Trump administration's foreign policy, their foreign policy on Russia, their foreign policy on Ukraine, their foreign policy on liberal interventionism writ large. And so you have this kind of economic hitman role that Harvard has played, and every system in that supports it. The Belfer Center, for example, at Harvard, which hosts not just Samantha Power, she's there now, the USAID administrator, who completely weaponized every aspect of that agency against half of the U.S. population through funding censorship initiatives, through funding initiatives that targeted Breitbart. It was USAID went after the advertisers and had whole primers on it. The Belfer Center was deeply involved with that inside of Harvard as well, where Samantha Power now is. The Belfer Center was actually teamed up with the Department of Homeland Security. They had a formal partnership with the Department of Homeland Security. The Belfer Center actually hosted DHS CISA events to censor the internet. Harvard coached the Department of Homeland Security ahead of the 2020 election, where they targeted 20 million Trump tweets and Trump supporter tweets as mis and disinformation, and then work to get a huge proportion of them censored at the narrative level. The Belfer Center, and I have all this clipped, it's all on my X account. If you just type in Belfer Center as a phrase, they coach them about how to set up, quote, incident response teams. And they actually put Breitbart in the repeat misinformation spreaders and went after domestic media voices through the Department of Homeland Security set up to stop another 9/11. But that was done because the U.S. government is banned by the First Amendment from doing it. So they reach into their partner network, and they reached into Harvard to do that. And Harvard also specializes in organizing riots and street protest movements. They call this nonviolent action, or the term folks may have heard a lot, the term color revolution,
Right.
named after things like the Velvet Revolution, the Orange Revolution, the Green Revolution, these sorts of things. The end stage of that is a street protest that removes the government from power by destabilizing it and making the police and law enforcement and military helpless against the throngs of hordes in the streets. And Harvard has an entire center on nonviolent action in order to organize those things. Well, what is Erica Chenoweth, for example, and Maria Stephan from the Belfer Center doing now? They're organizing the Tesla takedown protests, the street protests that effectively wedged Elon Musk, I think in certain respects, off of aspects of the White House by effectively doing domestic terrorism against a private car company simply to try to drive down its stock price. And so this is the sort of stuff that the Belfer Center was doing in Yugoslavia and in Ukraine ahead of the overthrow of Slobodan Milosevic and the Maidan Revolution. And so we've funded this network. We've trained this network with a very special set of dark arts skills. And they are now using it against our own people and our own government, getting $9 billion worth of federal funding in the process.
Mike, this is essentially the question I want to ask. The history of Harvard is that it was founded by Americans, for Americans, to educate Americans so we would compete with and eventually surpass the elite universities overseas. Now, this is something that is used to empower foreign governments, to give our intellectual know-how to foreign leaders, to clandestinely educate Xi Jinping's daughter, not tell anyone about it until a decade later, and let her take whatever she's learning back to the CCP. All of this stuff feels fundamentally against the original vision for Harvard, and certainly against anything we would want to spend $9 billion on. Where is the disconnect here between the Democrats and anyone who is defending this behavior and where we're at here in Trump's America?
Well, the issue is Harvard, as it is a corporation, and it exists effectively within the community of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. As the business community moved to profit from China because of the export markets, because of the supply chains, because of the manufacturing and labor, Harvard began to bet on China. Harvard began to bet on a world order that did not put the United States first. And so I think you see this reflected in much of the Democrat Party. You had the Biden first family directly profiting off of deals with China. Hunter Biden famously made $10 billion through CEFC China Energy. Hunter Biden was brokering the sales of LNG ports in Louisiana to China. You have huge portions of the diplomatic class who have these partnerships with China. You have huge portions of the California power base. Nancy Pelosi and Gavin Newsom, as China effectively offers California a lifeline and is doing development deals. And so you have this skating towards where the puck is going. And the problem is that puts the United States in a death spiral because they're not actually advancing U.S. interests as they do it. And part of that is, I think the U.S. State Department, as well as the Central Intelligence Agency and aspects of our Defense Department, have moved into this as well as the contractors have seen the markets in China and have seen the markets in other hostile foreign nation states. I think this is a lot of what was behind the Iran deal, this move to open up the oil and gas. And Trump put a ban on that during his administration. But then 2 months into the Biden administration, China bought, in March 2021, China signed a $400 billion deal with Iran to buy their oil and gas. I think this is also what's giving rise, in part, to some aspects of the Israel-Palestine conflict on college campuses, is that Bill Burns, the CIA director for Joe Biden, personally negotiated the Iran deal. And the whole network is involved in that. And the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which
Mike,
he ran.
Mike, this is extraordinary. Hold that thought.